Okay, guys, it is pretty late, but I want to continue a topic we addressed last week with the flip side. Last week we talked about some congressional districts that the GOP is in danger of losing. You know, the ones that the Democrats will have like a really like that. Those are their target districts, and it's not comprehensive. And this video isn't comprehensive, but essentially, we're dealing with an issue if you're a Republican, where if you're playing defense, it's very difficult to get voters motivated to come out and support good times because they're not really bothered by the fact that they're doing very well. That's if you're a Republican. Obviously, if you're a Democrat, you think things are going horribly. Okay, so let's not get into who's right or wrong at this point. Because what we're talking about is how do you motivate people to go out and vote, and how do you get the best outcome? Of course, the Democrats, as you can see from this is from Wikipedia, but it's pretty much basic math. The Democrats do need 25 seats in order to take the House, and I do believe, and apparently there's a reduction in the number of seats in the House. For what reason, I have no clue. But I'll tell you this, okay? The Republicans, they're in a bad situation in terms of being able to motivate people to go out and vote. If your administration is currently in the White House and the people that are supporting it aren't necessarily as motivated to go out and vote for it as the people who are opposed to it, because they could be contented and happy. That's something that I personally, I think this year's election, I'm definitely going to go out and vote, and I'll probably vote for most of the candidates, if not all the candidates. I'll vote for Republicans, and some of these races it doesn't matter. Like my district is a very blue district. It's almost it's bluer than the ocean. So essentially, the House election for my district isn't that important. But what's the answer? How do you keep the House if you're a Republican? Last week we dealt with if you're a Democrat, how do you win the House from the Republicans? Okay, today we're going to be talking about the opposite goal. You know, kind of game planning. So the best defense is a good offense, as some would say, and there are certain districts that the Republicans can probably pick off that are very vulnerable for the Democrats. So we're not going to see, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of almost anybody else you'll ask, the Republicans gaining a net number of seats in the House. But you could see the Democrats basically losing the chance to retake the House off of certain districts that were ripe for failure on their part. And that happens in every election. In every election, there's a few seats that flip one way, and then there's a few that flip the other way. So one of the ones that is most talked about was last year's 17th Congressional District, or the 17th Congressional District in Pennsylvania, where Connor Lamb is basically going to be running, because Pennsylvania went under some sort of bizarre redistricting. I think they either lost or gained congressional seats. I don't remember which one it was. And you're going to have him running against Keith Rothfuss. So you have two incumbents running against each other. And I think that is a great situation for either party. It's almost like it's double elimination. Okay, if your party wins, you keep the same person, but you knock out somebody who's already in the House. Now, a lot of people are saying that it's some of the polls are saying, oh, it's very favorable for Connor Lamb because the district is now going to be kind of favorable to him. And it very might well be. And you see all these ratings from the Cook Political Report and inside. But the later it's gotten, the later it's gotten, they do say it's leaning Democratic. So the real question is, will he be able to snatch the district from Rothfuss? And I would say that if you look at the geography of the district, I'm wondering if these polls are very accurate, because you're talking about Beaver and Allegheny counties in Pennsylvania, which are more rural areas. So, look, we can't go and say, well, the rural district, the Republicans are going to win. Because the fact is that Connor Lamb was supposedly not going to win in I think it was earlier this year, in fact, that he won the 18th district that was at the time. That was a district that many people said, well, that should be a safe Republican district. The problem with Republican voters, the problem with so-called Republican and conservative voters, is that they don't go and vote. Now, in the midterms, they typically have a little better of a track record. But in special elections, they're just apathetic. They don't give a shit. They'd rather be screwed in the ass, to be honest with you. And if you're a Republican voter out there, don't deny this. If there's a lot of these armchair activist Republicans that behave as if, oh, we got this. They don't go out with the same enthusiasm. You don't see tons of Republican protests all the time on many issues. There's a select few of issues where they will go out and protest, and believe me, I don't see it anywhere around here. So what's the answer to this? Well, I believe that Donald Trump is going to have to come and campaign for some of these candidates, including the guy running against Connor Lamb, Keith Rothfuss, I think his name is. And you see a fairly big, this is a huge spending discrepancy where Connor Lamb is just unbelievably outspending Keith Rothfuss. That could be a factor. Now, I'm not going to say money is everything, but these GOP candidates, if they want to stay in the House, they have to get their act together. I do believe, though, that when it comes to cash on hand as of June, they were almost neck and neck. So apparently Connor Lamb had spent a lot of money. So we're not talking about the Republicans being in this case, being at an advantage in terms of funding. So this guy is going to need a lot of help in order to knock out Connor Lamb and keep his own seat. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I think it is an excellent chance to pick off a Democratic incumbent. Moving on, you have the Minnesota 8th Congressional District. I think this one does have a fair chance of falling to the GOP. I would say, now, this is a district that Trump visited earlier this year, the Duluth region. I think that his support for mining, which is very big up there, that type of thing will garner a lot of support over there. And you're not going to be able to run as a staunch anti-Trumper up in northeast Michigan, or Minnesota, sorry, the way that you could in some of these other districts. Now let's look at some of these indicators. Now the incumbent Democrat here is retiring. His name is Rick Nolan. And people are saying this is a very big toss-up. And indeed, in the actual primary, the Democratic winner did poll with less votes than the Republican, but overall, there were a lot of people competing on the Democratic side because, what is generally considered over time a longstanding Democratic district. Of course, there would be a lot of people, veteran Democrats, who would run for the nomination there. So that's logical. But this guy, the Republican candidate, Stauber, did garner the most votes overall. And I do believe that he will have, a fair shot to knock off Joe Radinovich. Let's look at some of the other metrics. He is way outraising Joe Radinovich, and in fact, at the moment, he has much more money than him. And I'll tell you the reason why this is happening. Okay, and it's nothing again. I mean, if you're a Democrat, I think you would probably agree with me. And if you're a Republican, I don't see why you would object to what I'm saying. In Minnesota, the Democrats are kind of trying to hold on to a lot of statewide races, including the governor, attorney general, which that's a race Keith Ellison is running in. You're talking about, I think, two Senate races, two U.S. Senate races are up for ballot this year. So there's a bit of willingness to invest more in those and less in some of these House races. So this guy is getting the short end of the stick on that note. I personally don't care. So I think it's going to be a very difficult race for the Democrats to kind of focus on when they have all these other statewide races going on. And by the way, I think Minnesota, getting to this issue, Minnesota is more primed for Republicans to make inroads into it than are some of the other states, like Pennsylvania. I think is actually drifting a little more to the left. I think what happened in 2016, where Donald Trump won it, I don't know if it can be repeated. It's really a question of how strong they'll be able to campaign going forward there, and whether they can. I think that there's a sufficient backlash over there from like liberals in Pennsylvania that could blunt any more attempts for Trump to make gains in Pennsylvania, Trump and the Republicans. Minnesota, I think it's the opposite situation. I think that there might be like some sort of fatigue from so many years of Democratic leadership. Certainly a lot of establishment Democrats in Minnesota. So therefore, we have another Minnesota district, Minnesota's first district. I think I wanted to talk a little about some Ohio districts, but the data doesn't seem to indicate yet that there's. But I'll try to examine some of it and see if I could, make kind of my case why some of these Ohio districts would be able to roll Republican. But in this case, look, you have another retiring Democrat in the first district of Minnesota, as they call it. And indeed, you have you just have this this Democrat running with more votes than the Republicans, but there were more Republicans that voted. Apparently, that could be. Well, it's almost even numbers in terms of the total votes. 47,000 Democrats, 42,000 Republicans. I think that there will be a competitive race here. You see here that there was a poll taken in August where the Republican is ahead fairly substantially, and that's despite outraising the Republican. So as of July, and I think if the GOP wants to gain votes anywhere, wants to gain inroads, they have to start investing in states like Minnesota, and also trying to, of course, the policies, I think, of the GOP. It's questionable. It depends what type of person you are. If you, like Minnesota is a very strong union state. So if you're a union voter and you don't want like erosion of your union's power in the state, of course, it's going to be very difficult for you to see the light and vote for any party besides the Democrats. Now, there are a lot of union voters that see the tariffs and other economic policies, more private sector unions than public sector unions, of course, that would probably say, well, the Democrats are not really helping proceed with the agenda that I think is best for my job. I'm going to vote for the GOP. But I'll tell you what, it's not easy for a lot of these GOP people. I'll just say it. They're kind of riding on the coattails of Donald Trump, and I don't really see why they would be convinced. They would be convincing for the undecided voter. But we'll see what happens. Then there is the New Hampshire 1st Congressional District, which has flipped several times. Last election, it flipped to the Democrats. and it's currently occupied by Carol Shea Porter. And by the way, she'd she'd flipped the district one time from a Republican in 2006, that election, 2006. Then she lost it the next election. Then she regained it the election after that. So she's won the election. She's flipped the district 3 different times, and twice with the same opponent, Frank Junta. So what's the deal here? Why is this a swing district? Well, you can see that this district is located kind of between, between lower New England and Maine. So you have, it's kind of like a drive-through district, part of it, but then you have like the upper rural area. So there's good reason that either party would be able to just flip the district. Of course, you could have more urban areas and more well-educated areas. I think you'd certainly have people voting for kind of a liberal person. But let's look at the Ballotpedia here. Ballotpedia is very useful for this type of study. And if you're from this district, if you have more to add, if you think that there's something that I'm missing, go ahead and send me an email or comment on the video. But there was much engagement on the Democratic side, 63,000 votes for a number of different candidates. Chris Pappas, of course, won the overall, and then you had another person with 19,000. That's a substantial amount of people. On the Republican side, you had Eddie Edwards with 23,000 and another guy with 23,000, Andy Samberg. So, and then you have a libertarian, of course, which could throw a wrench in the Republican efforts, typically. So, let me see here. Let's get to disbursements. You see that the Democrats appear to have a fundraising advantage here. But the district was won by good old Trump. And people are saying it's going to lean Democratic. There's no polling available. But I'll tell you why I think that this could be a bellwether district for the Republicans. You see, New Hampshire is kind of a state where people are not necessarily rock-ribbed like Bible Belt people. Of course, it's New England, but they want kind of a very stable way of life there. It's almost like it's like a state where people don't want change that comes with a lot of hostility. And they're definitely not going to be voting for a person who will be like a screaming harpy that goes after somebody who's for abolishing ICE, stuff like that. And if Donald Trump can campaign there, and if he can make the case that a vote for this guy, Chris Pappas, no matter how mellow he seems during the election, will bring those people to power. Bring to power like the Pelosi's and some of the more toxic people on the Democratic side, like Alan Grayson. I think you really will have a problem for the Democrats. The most lukewarm candidate, the person with and I don't know much about this Chris Pappas guy, but the most pedestrian, mellow, like middle of the road candidate. If Donald Trump can kind of portray it as it doesn't matter how normal he looks, it doesn't matter how reasonable he behaves, he is giving way to madness. That's how you win a district in New Hampshire. It's probably the way you can win some of these other districts, some of the ones that we don't have enough time to cover today, or even the ones that were mentioned earlier. This Connor Lamb he basically had a campaign as a conservative Democrat when he won in the spring. And what Trump has to do increasingly is go to people at these rallies and tell them, look, these people can basically pull the wool over your eyes and say, hey, I'm just a reasonable person. I'm not going to take your guns away. I'm not going to vote for higher taxes or whatever. But ultimately, they can't promise that, because once they get into the House, what people have to understand, once you get into the House or the Senate, you have to play the game in order to get onto committees that really matter, that affect your district. And the way that you get onto those committees is that you sort of abide by the whims and desires of the leadership of your party. That's one of the reasons. By the way, Bernie Sanders was elected a House, a congressman from Vermont before he was in the Senate. And one of the benefits for him running as an independent, this is just as an illustration, was that he didn't necessarily have to follow the directions of a party whip or a leader, majority leader or whatever. He basically was able to say, I support this policy or I oppose policy X, whatever. That's one of the reasons that he was able to build kind of his own image. It doesn't work that way for the majority of candidates. That's one of the reasons that our system is kind of wrecked, because you elect a person. I elect somebody from my district, and I expect her, in my district it's a woman, I expect her to come and represent my concerns. That's not the way it works. She basically represents, first of all, the Democratic leadership. She's a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, which I think doesn't really represent anybody. It represents the interests of the Democratic Party. It doesn't really represent the interests of her own constituents. And there's ample evidence of that. We still have a lot of poverty and a lot of unemployment in this district, and she likes to pretend that she's really standing up for them. She doesn't have any bills to her name. So those are two different methods for him to kind of snipe at these Democratic incumbents if Trump decides to do that. I think he has to, and I think he is good at going on the offensive sometimes. I think in this case he doesn't have the option not to, because you cannot expect these Republican incumbents to be able to hold back the dam if you don't have enthusiasm from the Republican base. The Republican base, I believe, is one of the least effective implements in the conservative movement. You basically they need somebody like Trump. They probably, if we had elected, this is a different video I thought about making, but if we had elected a president like Marco Rubio, which I don't think would have happened, I think he would have lost, but let's say he would have been elected president and had a Republican majority coming into 2018 in either the House or the Senate, I think he would have lost both of those houses in a landslide, because the guy's a wet noodle. He does not go on the offensive. He doesn't know how to really strategize. That's one of the reasons he was such a flop running in 2016. That's one of the reasons Jeb Bush was such a flop. So that's what I have to say today. I think he does have to go and try to knock off those districts. Just like in the last video from last time, you can go check on that. The Democrats, they have a number of districts, like the one in Miami. I think it was the Florida 3rd district. I don't remember. They need to go. Each party knows where there's vulnerability, and therefore they attack accordingly. So please, let me know what you think. If you agree, disagree, want to add a different district, want to dispute what I said about a district that I mentioned in this video. So comment when this video uploads. Please like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Razor Ray Live Wounds, which is my live streaming channel, and have a great morning.